There's some consensus people there too, but no one like. Yeah, I mean, this is a decentralized organization. Yeah, I'm actually probably not going to do it. I'm thinking just going back to San Diego. Perfect. You can also put on.
Yeah, I want to live we're working on.
Okay, hello people. Woohoo! So I don't know how these normally start. If we do any bonus things.
Not really.
Sweet. Okay. Thank you, Sarah, for having me here, for providing the delicious popcorn in the space. So my name is Reese Lindmark. That's my name, and yeah, we're just going to chat today about this, an argument for prioritizing from a cause selection perspective, positively shaping the development of crypto assets. So before we get into this, though, I want to do some checks. So first, let's start with, we don't really need to know my background. So I want to do a little bit of an interactive thing first around this question of your deep why. And so this question is the one where you ask yourself, what am I doing in the world? And you say, well, why am I doing that? And then you say, well, why am I doing that? And you kind of 5 whys yourself for why you're kind of interacting in the world and what you're trying to do. So this is going to be interactive. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of time, to like probably 30 seconds to think about that, to say, what do I currently do, like professionally? Why do I do it? And then ask yourself, why do I do it? Why do I do it a couple times? And then we're going to share with a partner. Okay? Does that make sense? So we're going to take 30 seconds right now to think about your deep why, okay? So why do you do the things that you do? Take maybe 15 more seconds to keep going up that why chain. Once you think you've got something, well, why do I actually do that? Okay, cool. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to partner up. So pair up with someone next to you, and we're going to do a minute of sharing of just saying, what is your deep why, what is your deep why, and yeah, and have a good time with the person next to you. Meet them, yeah. You guys are together, yeah.
I just want to like live a meme life. I just want to have a life story that turns out to be
maybe 15 more seconds to keep sharing.
I just want to do it for the
Okay, and sorry if you were explaining your deep why, but I interrupted you, but that's the way it goes. It should be on a different kind of time clock. By the way, do you want to be a person that occasionally moves that? Just move this. Okay, well, honestly, all I need is someone to do this occasionally, so it doesn't turn off. So could we get one person? Let's get one, maybe 2 people to share their deep why. Would anybody like to share their deep why?
Well, basically, humanity is at risk of going extinct in this century, and I'm not okay with that.
Boom, that is a good deep why. Does anybody have another deep why?
I want to belong.
You want to belong. I like that deep why. There's kind of the macro humanity perspective and then the like inner self perspective. So my deep why, by the way, is is this. It is to catalyze, it's very aligned with what Rick talked about, which is to catalyze the humanity scale phase shift from hashtag late stage capitalism to what's next, which is game B, a world of abundant long-term human flourishing. So with that, that's what we're going to talk about today and how we get there with kind of crypto. So this is the claim that I'm going to be making. I just want to check with people about this claim. So who has thought, and the question here is whether you've thought about EA, whether like possibly shaping crypto assets should be high or low on EA's cause selection sheet. Okay? So who has never thought about this? Who has never thought about whether crypto should be high or low on the list? Wow, no one? Okay, I was going to say, I feel like who is strongly opposed to pushing something like this higher up the cause selection list? Yeah. Boom, okay. Who is neutral in terms of pushing it up the list?
What if you're like currently undecided? Does that count as neutral?
I think that's either neutral or haven't thought about it, depending.
Okay.
And who is strongly in favor of pushing it up the list? Okay.
Kind of in favor. Not
Totally.
Yeah.
There are only so many buckets that we have here. Yeah. Good. We're gonna check one other thing before we begin as well, which is a. So before we talk about this, actually, so there's a. I want to check with everybody around where everybody's at from a kind of a research perspective. So who all has spent more than 10 hours on the internet with 80,000 hours and or reading, like doing good, better, or whatever, for effective altruist stuff? Who spent more than 10 hours doing that? Okay, who spent more than like 25 hours doing that? Okay, cool. Who has spent more than 10 hours on the interwebs doing like blockchain crypto stuff, like reading about things, whatever? Blockchain. Okay, sweet. And who spent more than 25 hours doing that stuff? Okay. And then who has spent more than 10 hours looking at like complex system dynamics stuff? So this is like Daniel Schmachtenberger, Jordan Greenhall, SFI, Santa Fe Institute stuff. Who spent more than 10 hours doing that? Okay, so you spent more than like 25 hours doing that? Okay, sweet. So in general, we know a good amount. We definitely know a good amount about EA. We definitely know some about blockchain, and we know less about complex system dynamic stuff. So let's begin. What is the next thing, by the way? Great, sweet. So the claim is, go back one for a second, sorry. So the claim is that here's the current list, and my claim is that positively shaping crypto assets should be higher up on this list from a neglectedness, impact, tractability, aka scale, neglectedness, solvability perspective.
Is it on the list at all right now?
It is currently it just recently got added as a bullet point to the bottom of the list.
Who's this?
This is from 80,000 hours. Sweet.
Oops. Sorry.
It's all good.
Keyboard service.
That is my current state.
Very, there we go.
Perfect. Sweet. Click.
Yeah.
That's all good.
Which was that the right way or the wrong way?
That was the right way.
That was me.
Oh, like you got it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't know how this thing works. You can play with it.
It's all good. Yeah. So this is my claim, and I think there we go. So this claim is going to be broken. We're going to talk a little bit about so on the neglectedness side and on the tractability side, we won't be covering that as much because crypto is generally relatively neglected from an EA perspective and is relatively not tractable, I would claim. We're going to be mostly covering why positively shaping crypto assets could have a large impact. So we're going to be mostly talking about the scale side of things. And there are 5 parts of this argument, each of which are essentially separate from each other. There's EA should shape the implementation of any high-impact technology, whether it's blockchain or AI or bio or whatever. 2 is EA should shape the implementation of any high-impact organizational technology. We'll talk about what those in a second. 3 is there are a bunch of rich people in crypto, which is always a good place to start in terms of if you want to get people to donate to good EA causes. 4 is if crypto creates some of these new systems, it can result in these large creative destruction externalities, which is when you create a new system and then the old system is sad and there's job loss and there's things like that. So talk about that. And then 5 is blockchain might help us solve game theory. LOL. Let's go to the next slide. So this one is a relatively simple one, which is that as new high-impact technology comes into the world, we as humans create it, and that technology impacts society, and that we traditionally, there are all these profit-motivated incentive structures that deal with that high-impact technology, and they are not EA/quality motivated incentive structures. And so the EA community should bring the EA perspective into any new technology that has this kind of big scale. And then the claim here is that if blockchain is a high-impact technology, then EA should try to shape it positively with kind of a different incentive set than the traditional profit-motivated one. So this is a relatively simple claim, and then this question about whether blockchain is a high-impact technology is could be very up in the air. So we'll go to the next slide, and I think that's essentially that one. So this next slide is about blockchain as a high-impact organizational technology, and it's essentially the very same claim. Could you go one more, actually? It's pretty much the very same claim, which is that we as society create these organizational technologies, and as we do so, we should make sure that markets and traditional incentive structures work with them, and that kind of EA-motivated incentive structures work with them. So if you go back one, so an organizational technology is this concept from Albert Wenger from Union Square Ventures, and he states essentially that over time we've developed systems in society to coordinate people and then to motivate people. And there are some things that are really good at coordination, like the state. It's very good at saying, here's what's going to be happening, this is the machine, and here's how it's operating, but the motivation is not quite as high there. But with something like a market has low coordination, it's a kind of a complex organism style thing, but the motivation for it is high. There's lots of things motivating it. What's up, Rick?
So, not clear how you read that. Are you putting the state low because states aren't motivated to do jack, or because states can't motivate people to do?
The second one. So I'm talking about from the perspective of a participant within one of these systems. How much does that system coordinate you, and how much does that system motivate you? And also, by the way, this is not my graph. This is Albert Wenger's graph. So this is all to say that there are various motivation coordination systems that we've made over time, these what he calls organizational technology, and they've popped up over time. There's the nation state, there are things like markets, there are things like firms and companies. The network was a relatively recent one, things like Facebook and Amazon and what have you, these big networks, Airbnb, etc. And then his claim, and I mostly agree with him, is that blockchain is a new organizational technology, a new set of ways to motivate and coordinate people, and has various different properties than these other ones. So this is an organizational technology, and the claim, if you go to the next slide, is that, hey, if there's a new organizational technology, it's going to impact society in a big way, as nation states and firms and networks and markets have, and so we should make sure that that new organizational technology is used for good and not evil. So that's essentially the second point, which is pretty darn similar to the first one. Let's go to the third one. This third one is just like there are rich people in crypto one. And so there's this opportunity to direct this redistribution of wealth. So you could look at this in various different ways. The total market cap is around 300 billion these days. If you look at something like Miri, they've raised $2.5 million last year, 66% of which was from crypto, and Vitalik gave, I think, $250,000. The Pineapple Fund was this other recent high-profile one. They gave $86 million to charity recently, $5 million to give directly. And just to kind of put this stuff in context in terms of how much crypto wealth there is out there, the Founders Pledge, which gets founders to donate a percentage of their exit proceeds when they have an exit or an IPO or get acquired or whatever, they have $412 million of pledges. People, not actual money yet, but pledges across about 1,000 different individuals. So this is all to say that crypto is an opportunity to redirect. There are lots of rich people, and if we can get those rich people to redirect some of their newfound crypto wealth towards EA causes, that would be powerful. So that's like why something like a crypto pledge would be a powerful opportunity. Go to the fourth one. Yeah, so this one kind of takes those other three as pseudo-givens, and then talks about these creative destruction externalities. So this is to say that if blockchain is a new organizational technology, if it's this new wealth redistribution engine, if there's disintermediation from it, if there's all these things that kind of happen from it, then, and especially because crypto is very connected to wealth and power, if this all happens, then it's going to create these creative destruction externalities. And go to the next slide. Yeah, so let's talk about what one of these creative destruction externalities is. So these are these fun system graphs that I make. I do have flux on. It might make sense to turn flux off. Let's do it. Disable until sunrise. Beautiful. How is that? Does that look better? So, okay. So the way that these work, hopefully. Great. Yeah, we'll see. So it's slow, but it's happening. So the way that this works is a creative destruction externality is when technology creates new things, like something like AI and automation. It creates awesome stuff. AI goes, there's a reinforcing feedback loop with profit, and AI generally, like, you can think of it as taking away blue-collar jobs or whatever. This is the truck driver argument, what have you. And as that happens, it creates variations on political unrest. So this is a creative destruction externality. When you create a good new thing, you took down something from the past, and therefore people are unhappy about that thing. So you can imagine this as both AI and automation leading to blue-collar job loss, which leads to political unrest. That's one creative destruction externality. You can imagine blockchain, which is all about disintermediation, taking things and removing the middleman, whether it's any kind of trusted centralized third party. As it disintermediates things, a lot of those trusted centralized third parties are white-collar job folks. And so that also leads to political unrest. So this claim about creative destruction externalities is, let's see how we do this. Command Enter, boom. So this claim about creative destruction externalities is one that says if blockchain actually does these various things that it wants to do in terms of doing dramatic power shifts within the world and disintermediation and those kind of things, then we want to make sure that that transition from existing institutions towards new institutions is smooth. So that's the concept of creative destruction externalities. This is you can imagine this as, so this is a list over time of, from a pure nation state perspective, so thinking of just that organizational technology, what happened as these power shifts occurred. And so you can see, in general, things lead to war. As people gain or lose power, those things do not happen that smoothly, and then people are angry for various reasons, and that leads to war. So if this is within nation states, the claim is that, let's do all these. Yeah, the claim is that if that one was within nation states, the claim here is that blockchain would do this for two nation states, not just within nation states. So I don't actually want to look at this one, I don't think. Values. I don't think these are necessary. Yeah, sweet. So let's move on to this one. So the last one was about a concept of the creative destruction externalities, and as we do kind of macro systemic system change, making sure that happens in a smooth way. This fifth one is about that blockchain can help us solve this game theory meta problem. And the idea is that if we take that same list from before, which was that list of causes from 80,000 hours, and you say, okay, let's take that list and let's bucket them by what we call like the generative function, which is essentially the root cause or whatever, what makes the issue actually occur, then you can say, well, for something like all these issues over here, factory farming, developing world health, smoking in the developing world, land use reform, those are all essentially empathy problems, in that if we had more empathy for farmed animals, if we had more empathy for people that are not around us, or people in the developing world, then if you were to have that deep of empathy, then some of these problems would go away to some extent. That you'd say, wow, we now exist in a world of like more abstract, complete empathy. That's awesome. We shouldn't do these things to these people. We treat them as if they're our own family. Therefore, we solve some of these problems. So that is what I mean by this meta problem, or this generative function. And this one over here is the game theory generative function. So these are essentially coordination problems. So you have something like risks from AI, biosecurity, and nuclear security. Those are all arms race issues, where you have Google and Facebook, who all are going really fast with the AI, and they are incentivized essentially to push out their variants on AGI before others do, and that could lead to, and they might not be as safe as we would want. It's a similar thing with biosecurity and with nuclear security, where you have people doing arms races where each person wants to keep one-upping the other. That same thing is also true for climate change, but climate change is a tragedy of the commons game theory problem, where no one wants to actively do the thing when other people are not also doing it. So the claim, and this is if you were skeptical about the first four things, you should be also super skeptical about this one, and I would say even more skeptical, that blockchain can help us solve this meta problem. And if it was able to solve this meta problem, then we would be able to solve each of these, and so therefore it would have very high impact. You can think of this as if we solve one of these ones but lose to the rest, that's sad. So we want to make a generative function such that we not only solve each of these ones, but also, as we have the massive converging exponential technology, that we solve all the upcoming problems from various new things like VR and AR and biotech and CRISPR and robotics and whatever. As all those things come up, we want to make sure we have solved the generative function for game theory problems. So this is a piece from 80,000 Hours on their recent, they just up-prioritized one of the things on the cause selection sheet, which was like improved institutional decision making. And this is them essentially talking about that distributed exponential technological change. So this is essentially them saying what I just said, which is, hey, we think that improving decision making is good, because as the risks that we face in society are rapidly growing, as more and more stuff is happening, you have technological developments and all of these crazy things, our destructive power is quickly increasing. And so crises can even result from accidents, so that is an issue. You want to go to the next one? Again, this is from that same piece, and moving to this meta level and why that can be good to solve things. They say, hey, when we usually think about doing good in the world, we think about solving specific things. But instead, you could solve things by making it easier to solve problems, generally speaking. And one advantage of this approach is that, if successful, it could enable humanity to better tackle many different problems, including those we haven't even noticed yet. So again, it's them essentially saying what I just said, which is, hey, we might need to go to the meta level to solve more problems, especially as the massive convergent change happens. So now the claim for why blockchain could actually solve game theory. Again, that is a massive claim. So two things are key. One is it decreases the external, essentially the costs to coordinate. So if you decrease the costs, and if you increase the desire to coordinate, then maybe much more coordination will happen. So that's the claim. So why does it decrease the cost to coordinate? So this one, there are a couple kind of small claims here, but it decreases the cost to coordinate because they allow for these smart contracts, which are ways to exchange value over the internet with if-then statements, essentially. They allow for these strong pre-commitments in the absence of trust. So anybody around the world, you can say, hey, I am going to get in on this thing with you, and only if a bunch of other people then do this thing and also donate to give directly or whatever, then we all, and once all the funds get in, boom, then we donate. And so this, from an abstract level, allows us to make these strong pre-commitments, and it stops us from backing out of them because they exist as smart contracts on the blockchain, and so you can't say, hey, Paris Climate Agreement, definitely, and then like run away from that thing. It's like, nope, it's no smart contract. Sorry, homie. So smart contracts allow us to do that. Tokens, so they democratize incentive design. So the claim here is that through these smart contracts and through anybody's ability to trustlessly exchange value and if-then statements over the internet, that allows us to play a lot more of these incentive design games, essentially, which traditionally was in academia, and now mechanism design and incentive design as a thing is out there in the world. And so this allows for more of this incentive alignment because if you have more people who can make incentives, then they're going to be more different stakeholders, and then each of them will want to will have voice in order to align their incentives. So what people traditionally call this is, there's a concept called a platform co-op or a protocol co-op, which is where you have a traditional thing like, let's call it Uber, but instead of Uber, where Uber has most of the ownership and most of the governance, instead that is kind of distributed into the system, where you have distributed and decentralized ownership and governance of the platform. So that's an example of this incentive alignment. There are these new platform and protocol co-ops that are showing up. And another example of this is what's called tokenize the enterprise, which is where you essentially take an existing company and then tokenize it by giving people tokens for the equity, giving people tokens for what they've contributed to the platform, and then giving people tokens for things that they contribute to the platform in the future. So this is another way that people are actively pushing tokens into the ecosystem and then aligning incentives around them. So that's a claim there. And then finally, so let's talk about this one. So this one is a traditionally speaking, rational actors have never really been financially incentivized to support the commons. It's like, look, I can support the commons, but why would I do that? I'm just going to let this other person do it. But the interesting thing with these new microeconomies is that they actually do financially incentivize you to support the commons, and which therefore diminishes the tragedy of the commons. So we're going to show what this looks like. Let me make sure. Maybe not. Well, we don't. So, yeah. So the way that this works is as follows. It's kind of it's essentially just a chain. So you have, if you're a person who wants to support the commons, let's say you're in the Ethereum ecosystem, and you want to support a project, or you want to support some like infrastructure that should be built. So if I'm a person, then what I can do is I can support that infrastructure. Let's say I have 100 ETH or whatever, 100 Ethereum, and I give 10 of it to support this new infrastructure project. That infrastructure project goes, it's really awesome. Oh, sweet, it succeeded. We have a new block explorer, we have a new wallet, or we have a new whatever. And now, as a result of that new piece of infrastructure, the Ethereum ecosystem gets better, and more people then want to actively be part of that ecosystem. You're like, oh, that's cool. And you especially think that's cool because that 90 ETH that you still held, as you've held it, the demand for that ETH has gone up because the ecosystem has gotten better. So you pretty much, you give things to the ecosystem, it makes the ecosystem better. As a result of making the ecosystem better, it increases the demand of the tokens to be used in that ecosystem, and then as the demand of the tokens increases, your tokens, also the price of them increases because there's more demand for them. So that system, what this guy Vinay Gupta calls metastructures, they allow for that allows you to say, hey, this actually might make sense for me to support the commons because the price of my ETH will go up as a result. And so this claim is especially true around microeconomies, where you can be, like, you could think of it as generally true, where it's like, if I have a lot of US dollars, I could make a new train system in America, and then as a result, more people move to America and whatever, and because I held a bunch of US dollars, there's more demand for them, and the price of them increases or whatever, it's a very same structure to that, but it just exists. But it just exists at a very micro economy level. So that is that claim. Okay, sweet. Then this other one is, so if we've moderately decreased the costs to coordinate, now we should also increase the desire to coordinate, because you can imagine a world in which the costs are really low, but people are still like, I don't have any desire to coordinate. That doesn't seem good, which is pretty much society as it exists today. So my claim is that blockchain is a good incubation chamber, and what I call a long-term strange attractor, aka a good place for people to see this new cooperative model at work, and they're like, wow, this is a better world, and then essentially gets more and more people into this new exciting system. My claim is that the blockchain ecosystem is a good incubation chamber to beat these coordination games. So to understand why this might be true is, so this is from Marxism stuffs, and this is this idea. This is what Marx called essentially the key reinforcing loop of capitalism. And so you have the base, which is technology, and what he calls capital, which is like the lumpen proletariat, factories, whatever. And today we think of it as like technology and what have you. There's the base, and then that also interacts with the superstructure, which is essentially the ideas, the art, the ideology, the mindset, and these two kind of reinforce each other. So as you can also think of this as like a tech society loop, where tech is happening, it impacts society in various ways, and then society, as a result of those impacts, makes different kinds of technology in the future. And so these things kind of work in a reinforcing loop, and this is why it has been difficult for to do kind of a full macro-systemic change or exit away from something like capitalism is, because this is a very strong reinforcing loop. So what I've talked about thus far is essentially the base, where you have where I've said, hey, we've decreased the cost to coordinate as a result of new technology and organizational technology of blockchain. What also should be a claim is that we need to, if we want to exit this reinforcing loop, we need to create another reinforcing loop over here that has both the base and the superstructure, new ideology around this new system that we're trying to create. So when we're trying to create this new ideology, there's a little bit of context that we need. We talk about this fragility a bunch, where you have the massive converging exponential technological change. I say that in kind of a way, but it's kind of terrifying. And then we also have abundance from technological progress. So do you want to go to the side? So we didn't actually look at these earlier, but this is why this is essentially the generative function for why we're experiencing this massive technological change. Is that these are these learn, create, and distribute value loops, and right now information travels freely over the globe. You can learn, create, and distribute value so quickly. And there are 4 billion network smartphones, and there's all these things like Google and whatever, and so you have these really quick value loops that allow you to produce value really quickly, which is why we have this exponential change. So you want to go to the next one. So that's what that fragility looks like, and then this abundance. This is a great graph from Max Roser from World and Data, and you can look, hey, over the last 200 years, what has happened? And it's like, well, and so here's 200 years ago, here's today, and you're like, look, extreme poverty. Everybody used to live in extreme poverty. Now no one does. No one had a basic education. Now almost everybody does. No one was literate. Now almost everybody's literate. No one was in democracy. Now we got like half the people in democracy. No one used to be vaccinated. Now almost everybody's vaccinated. Half of the kids used to die before the age of 5. Now almost no one dies before the age of 5. It's like, stuff has gotten so much better at both a macro level and, let's see if I put this in here, a micro level. So this is a graph on your happiness with respect to money. So as you get more and more money, does it keep on increasing your happiness? It's like, no, it has diminishing returns with respect to happiness. So this is a log scale down here, and you can see essentially as income increases, as you get about to the $40,000 per year mode, you stop getting happier, or you drastically diminish returns on happiness when you get more money. So this is why, by the way, for me, any money I make over $4,000 a month, I self-tax myself half of it and give it back to the system in various ways. And that's just an example of abundance. Like, that doesn't change my happiness at all. If anything, it makes me happier. So we live in a world of fragility, but we also live in this world of abundance. And those two claims together, combined with the blockchain context. So the blockchain context, one where you have these lower costs of coordination, which is all cool, from the claims above. It's this community of people. And so essentially this claims like why this is a good incubation ground. So it's the low costs of coordination are lower, which is a good thing. It's a community of people who are already hyper aware of incentives. That's all they do is every day they just talk about the incentive structures of things, and try to design new cryptoeconomic systems for those structures. It is closely related. It's super related to this open source community, which already has this mindset of common goods and interoperability and collaboration and distributed governance and ownership. So it's very connected to that world already. And it's this largest distributed group of people who already feel this abundance through the rise of crypto prices. And so they essentially have enough money and are moving up Maslow's hierarchy of needs to start working for the greater good. So, given that context, essentially the claim here is that given the macro context of fragility plus abundance and the blockchain context of all those various things around coordination and abundance, therefore, we are starting to see a new, this new story of how reality works, this new ideology, that new superstructure that Marx talks about. We're starting to see that happen in the blockchain space today. So here are a bunch of random examples. I'll be primarily pulling from the Ethereum ecosystem, because that's what I'm most aware of. These are a bunch of people that are already self-taxing themselves. So this is an example of these Ethereum Community Fund, which are these 6 Ethereum projects. And we say, go along, Raiden, Cosmos, Maker, and Global Brain. And they all gave together, solve that coordination problem, to support a $100 million fund to support Ethereum infrastructure. So they're essentially playing out that metastructure thing that we talked about before. ETH Prize is another example. It's these 250K infrastructure grants supported by a bunch of these various projects. So these are active people self-taxing themselves. Consensus is a good example of people who are actively supporting all this randomly cool technical infrastructure that's being created. Coinbase is giving $25,000 a month to open source software each month. And this is all, remember, this is all in addition to the work at the protocol level, the Ethereum Foundation level, where they have a bunch of coders working on things and also a big grant program going to create this new infrastructure. This is all an example. So that was all an example of the self-tax mindset existing. And then an example of, so in addition to the kind of self-tax mindset and the non-accumulation mindset, you also need the mindset of this, we're not competing for things. It's not a win-lose scenario. It's not a scarcity-driven scenario, but rather it's a win-win, shared outcome, co-evolution, co-opetition, collaboration scenario. In places where you would traditionally see competition, we're seeing a lot of co-evolution and collaboration. So there's this thing called Plasma, which is this infrastructure project that's happening, and they have a bunch of these implementation calls where probably people from 5 different projects get together, coordinate across all the time zones of the world, get 20 people together and talk about how each of their implementations is happening and how to help each other around the challenges. That's happening. There's another version of that, but for scaling more generally, which was this big conference where everybody got together and chat about scaling and had a bunch of little workshops for people to kind of break into subgroups and work through those challenges. There's another one like that, but for decentralized exchanges, where a bunch of people who, again, they're competing, essentially, they got together and talked about ways that they can collaborate. There's another version of it with cryptoeconomic primitives. And then the other version of this is, because the ecosystem, so this is where we would traditionally see competition, but we see collaboration that's also happening, but things that would not traditionally collaborate, but are rather really pushing for interoperability, for working with each other. So this is, there's a bunch of these emerging stacks, essentially, that are showing up in the ecosystem, where you have Ethereum as the underlying compute thing, the underlying compute part of the stack, Aragon, which is like a decentralized governance, like voting part of the stack, District 0x, which is a peer-to-peer like marketplace part of the stack, and then Decentraland, which is kind of a VR world, like a geospatial world. So Decentraland interoperates with District 0x, interoperates with Aragon, interoperates with Ethereum, and so people are using a bunch of different parts of the stack in this kind of interesting way. So, pause for a second, go back to one thing. So yeah, so this is all to say that as we try to, if we're experiencing all these, if we're in a world of fragility these days, and we're experiencing the massive converging exponential technological change, then we need to create new generative functions to, so that for current game theory problems and for future game theory problems, that we will be able to beat them. And in order to beat those game theory problems, people need to coordinate better. And in order for people to coordinate better, we need to both create good new technical infrastructure for people to coordinate and decrease the cost of coordination. And we need to increase the desire and the stories around coordination. Yeah, so that's the final claim about scale. In general, stuff is relatively highly neglected. There are various EAs working in crypto. There's all of you here. There's a lot of people who are EAs who are interested in crypto. There's about 400 Facebook group. There's lots of high-level overlap, high-level kind of nerd overlap. People who are in the rationalist community are into crypto in various ways. This also changes when you think about neglectedness. It depends on what exactly you're talking about, because I made a bunch of random claims before. So like, if we're talking about crypto whales donating to charity, there may not be as much neglectedness, because if you look at something like the Pineapple Fund, it's already happening. Like we may not need to concentrate on it. But for something like the creative destruction of externalities or these kind of macro systemic changes, that's likely more neglected. I would claim probably that's low tractability, that there's not, that's going to be hard to make progress here. A, you don't have much data. B, it's like, when we talk about the crypto and nerd overlap, it's like, could that be good or bad? If the crypto world was already interested by EA ideas, which they are to various extents, why haven't they already done something about it? Or maybe they're ready enough for it, and so it's kind of inevitable, so we don't even need to put effort towards it. Yeah, and again, like with the one before, from a tractability perspective, from how solvable it is, it's likely more solvable to virally spread something like a crypto pledge, to get more people to self-tax themselves to donate at causes. That is going to be more possible, and I could talk about the progress that's being made there, but this one is different. It's a lot less tractable to make the claim that we will move away from late-stage capitalism. Like, that's pretty much as untractable as it gets. There's a bunch of new data that could change my position around this. Things connected to scaling, things connected to trust. I think trust is a big piece of this. If we trust our existing institutions and systems, we might not need to move these new systems. If the governments beat the coordination problem first and crack down on crypto in various ways, that would make me less into it. If some of these initial tests toward this macro system change start to fail, then that would make me sad, or not sad, or change my position. And then also the key classic one is just the cost of delay. So if various other causes had increasing need to solve them more quickly, then I would definitely move over to them. And would argue that you should do. You want to go again. So with that, that is my presentation. So thank you. And before we do questions, I want to say the goal, and I might even take some notes, is the goal is to not. I am going to take some notes on a thing that looks like this. The goal is to give me brutal feedback. The goal is to be hyper skeptical and to be hyper saying this stuff doesn't make any sense. So that's what I want. Sweet. So questions. Great.
So very early on, you said the point is for EAs to be in steering the development of this new organizational technology. Where would you say in what way would you say the organizational technology is going in the wrong direction, and you'd like some people to lean on the tiller and cause it to change direction?
Yeah, good question. So, so first, from an incentive level, I would make the claim that the new organizational technology of blockchain, right now, these days, is primarily based around profit-motivated incentive structures. And And so that's kind of the underlying incentive claim, is that the incentive structures are likely very aligned with profit-motivating things, and therefore not EA things. Specifically, are there issues with how this organizational technology is being used? I think that you could point to a couple different ones. You could point to how blockchain uses lots of electricity in the world, and how that is a sad thing. You could point to the various like crypto bros in the world and how they are getting into it for the money perspective and getting the Lamborghinis and things like that. So there's some like cultural things there that I'd like to shift. And beyond those, yeah, I think that the other classic one is probably something around like privacy and transparency, where you have governments and nation states looking at crypto as a way to essentially track various people in various ways to achieve their means. So those would be kind of three things that come to the top of my mind for how blockchain as an organizational technology is being poorly used today. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Yeah. So,
The profit motive, therefore not EA motive, is a bold claim.
yeah.
It's
Oh.
allowed to stand unchallenged.
Yeah. So tell me more about that.
Like, you made the claim.
And so let me make sure. And you're saying, and let me make sure this claim that you're saying I said, because I almost someone said it, that if someone is making if there's incentive for profit, then that is not incentivized for effective altruist
If
things.
that's how you want to phrase it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think that is... When I think about that claim, I think about the KPI, or the one metric that matters for each of those two worlds. And you have one world over here, which is the venture capital, company, startup world. And that world is one in which you are trying to get as much ROI, as many dollars back as possible. While the EA world, the KPI over there, is essentially qualities per dollar. So I would...
KPI?
What's that?
KPI?
Sorry, key performance indicator. Essentially just a metric, just your main metric that matters. So yeah, I think that from that perspective, I do think that they are different in that the thing that they're optimizing for is different.
The dollars versus qualities I agree with a lot more than like the profit is just like you're using two different metrics of it.
Say more on that?
I'm saying like qualities are just a different metric of profit than dollars.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you that qualities are a different metric of value creation for the world than dollars. Are we aligned on that?
Phrasing is tricky, but like I'm satisfied.
Okay. I feel like you're not satisfied, but that's okay.
So my version of that question was not
Yeah.
on the like what's wrong with the profit side, but
Yeah.
like what are the meaningful ways in which we would like if you want people who are profit minded to be some other minded,
Yeah.
Is the case for that seems mostly unrelated, or is the case of that I understood seemed not very related to anything about blockchain technology in principle, more just about there happens to be this community of people, and like they could have been any community of people, and that were rich for any reason. And does that seem correct for
That
the
is
argument?
pretty much correct. So the two claims there are essentially high impact technology is created and put into the world, whether it's the internet or railroads or whatever it is. That high impact technology is put into the world, and generally speaking, that high impact technology has been optimized around profit. And I think that when new high impact technology comes into the world, we should also optimize it around essentially qualities per dollar. And so I'm making that claim for both technology and organizational technology. And I'm just saying that blockchain is an example of those.
Cool for now.
Okay, nice. Sure.
I think there's an example that could put basically this into perspective, and that basically the fact that blockchain could solve could basically introduce opportunities for coordination across parties that could be a bad thing in this side of collusion can create inefficient outcomes like price fixing, like basically, for example, like manipulation or something like that.
Yeah.
And I've been coming across like a bunch of blockchain projects which are literally like coordinated pump and dumps.
Yeah.
And so that I feel that this is pretty much on the front of something for the profit motive and not necessarily like creating value, and that if more EAs did things that weren't like that, then I think that would be a net plus to like the ecosystem.
Yeah. So if I understand you correctly, it's that you can, if it's easier to solve coordination problems, where you can solve them for good or you can solve them for bad,
exactly.
and lots of people are solving them for bad, and therefore we should not be part of a thing that is doing coordination problems for bad.
Or try to like figure a way to break them.
Yeah, I think we can either express voice within that system, or we say there are new ways to solve coordination problems.
Yeah.
Let's do it for good, or we can exit that system and say we don't want to be part of that.
Yeah.
I agree with that, though.
I just want to say that smart contracts are public. So
Yep.
if someone's coordinating for evil, you can use other things to deal with that too. So
I agree.
everyone knows they're an evil coordinator. So.
And that is, reputation as a new age thing. We're going to give our specific
It's
shots
just
at
that they're public dumps you can't really do if everyone knows you're going to do it.
They're not necessarily public.
Well, it's
With smart contracts aren't though.
I mean, there's no technical reasons why.
I mean, you can
There
throw into
are-
identity. That's one of the things that blockchain does that's against coordination is that in the real world, a lot of if you're spending money, for instance, that's tied to your identity, that's tied to your account. Whereas on blockchain, you can create hundreds of new accounts for any new thing when you want to do something against your reputation.
I mean, kind of,
Yeah.
but like most of that's not anywhere near as anonymous as people think.
I think there's definitely there's a spectrum of transparency versus privacy,
Yeah.
and that probably if you try, you can be as private as you want, and likely if you don't, then you can be seen pumping and dumping. What's up?
Yeah, so when you showed the list of the top concerns right now, the one at the top was AI risk.
Yes. Yep.
When I think of the classic AI risk concern, usually it's written in some story that involves cybercrime. Like the AI will figure out how to coordinate across different people to get them to deliver arms supplies and blah blah blah, blah right? So there's a very simple hook that you can have where you can share how crypto is relevant right off the bat for that top concern that exists.
Yeah.
But my other point would be that by pushing forward crypto, you may be increasing the X risk inherent in unfriendly AI.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be an argument for pushing governments to shut crypto down.
Yeah. And that tell me more about that side of the argument as well.
Well, again, like we have the capabilities as like a government to shut down the individual people who are currently tied to like IPs and such to basically disincentivize the resurgence of this at all. But we can only do that while it's still young. At some point, it's going to get to very mature stage where governments can't really swoop in and nip in the bud because it's already grown like far
bigger than expected. Yeah. So your claim is that that some of the crypto things can overlap with various other things on the cost selection sheet, and one of those is positively shaping AI, and there are many ways it does it, and A is it could maybe be helpful around the coordination problem perspective. It could maybe be helpful. There's also lots of things that are being tried to make, like if you've heard like Ocean Protocol or Singularity Net, these are things that are blockchain based that try to make essentially de-silo data and make like data substrates so that we don't have these silos of data. So those are like the good side of things, but there's also the very bad side of things, which is crypto could be used to create a kind of a runaway incentive structure AI that just accidentally hits us in a very bad way, kind of like Bitcoin is doing to the environment right now, but in a much more aggressive way, or that the privacy side of things makes us so that we can't stop stuff.
Yeah, and in something you just said how Bitcoin is making us use up a lot of power that could be used for something else, and in some sense you can almost see that as we're tiling the surface of the earth with CPUs,
Yes.
which aren't necessarily that much better than paperclips from a EA standpoint.
Totally. Yeah, I agree. What's up?
Can you give specific examples of how you use blockchain to resolve specific X risks, like nuclear security, say, or biosecurity?
Yeah, good question. So, yeah.
Add an addendum, which is in a way that you wouldn't have been able to do without blockchain.
Yes, totally. Yeah. So the weird thing that I would claim here is most of my claims of this form are based in that base and superstructure loop. And what I mean by that is both there is the technological coordination that is enabled by smart contracts and by open source interoperable software and those kind of things, but there's also the convincing people and telling them that we should go for shared outcomes. So, specifically around something like, let's do AI risk as an example here. So,
5 minutes sold.
Exactly. Jesus Christ. Yeah, 0% chance.
We're dead.
Yeah. So my instinct is that so what you're trying to do is you're starting from a technical perspective, from the base perspective. You're starting to push more of these platforms that have more interoperable data with each other. So this is like, as an example, Toyota is working with a bunch of blockchain people around these self-driving cars, and they are creating a self-driving car open data set rather than like Google's Uber Waymo data set, which is much more siloed. So as that propagates, and as things like Ocean Protocol propagate, which make a underlying data layer that's more interoperable with other data layers, that starts to break down some of the traditional Google, Amazon, Facebook style things around these kind of big data silos. And as we have that, we are also continuing to educate the people around this shared outcome that we have, which that shared outcome could be some kind of, hey, we want to not have X risk, or we want to be in a world in which Google and Facebook, they co-evolve with each other towards abundance for the world rather than a bad X risk thing. So you would be able to essentially, as you're telling that story about the shared outcome, the technical stuff is also happening to some extent, and the final piece here, which is the one that I am the least confident about, but there's some experimentation happening here, is essentially, so when you have new tokens, those tokens can represent, you can create incentive structures around those tokens in various strange ways, and there's some iterations being done around good structures for like impact tokens and things of that variety. So you can imagine a shared impact token for something like probability that we die from AI X risk in the next 30 years. And then you can imagine tokens around that and prediction markets around that then allow people to actively put their money towards and say, hey, this is an outcome, a shared outcome that I want, and crypto economics. So, just to say, I don't have any, and I think that same claim is also equally as vague for the other X risks. All of the claims are of this weird base and superstructure form where you are both changing the technical side of things, decreasing those coordination costs, and you are using memes to get people to believe in a new shared outcome future. Okay. Yeah. What's up?
So you mentioned conferences and other evidences that people active in blockchain universe are working on interoperability.
Yeah.
What signs are there that they're working on reliable code, provably correct coding systems for your smart contracts so that you could actually trust your embodied in Solidity smart contract?
Yeah. So in general, this is called formal verification, and this is the idea that so you can think of different lines of code as having so something like rockets there's a lot of money in a rocket and there's not that many lines of code, and so the dollars per line of code is super high. It's like, oh, oops, I forgot a semicolon, the rocket blows up. That's sad, and so in those ecosystems you have formal verification, which allows you to say, hey, we know as a result of functional programming and types that this is going to, that we essentially know the outcome of this code. And so that work is also being done in the blockchain land around new smart contract platforms like Tezos, which has formal verification built into its coding.
They have a hard time with actual contracts, though.
Is that what do you mean by that?
Their whole legal.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, there are issues there. Yes, they are still off the ground because they're dealing with people. Does that answer your question?
There's also basically like marketplaces for smart contract audits, and it's like QuantStep and SageWise that are trying to basically like either to create markets for arbitration, or it's kind of or it's for security people to break their code. And also I think there's still probably people working on TLA plus or basically like things to test smart contract logic temporally to make sure that nothing like unexpected goes on.
I agree. Those bug bounty systems are pro. What's up?
Yeah, I'm curious about so like a lot of stuff around blockchain, especially like technology that like people want to build on top of blockchain, right? And this focus on being able to be distributed and stuff like that reminds me a lot of how we were all crazy for like peer-to-peer systems in the like early 2000s, right? And ultimately like they ended up having like some like niche applications, right? But we haven't seen like the generalized like realization of like this glorious utopia of like peer-to-peer systems, right? So like on the assumption that like blockchain may fail perhaps in like some similar way, what are maybe like the niche cases that might like stay around for blockchain in like 10-15 years when maybe there's some new like decentralized thing that like we're all excited about?
So I think there are two parts to that question. One is, do these new blockchain systems, do they have the same problem as those old peer-to-peer systems that never got off the ground? And then two, assuming that the blockchain never gets off the ground, just like all the old peer-to-peer systems did, will it actually do anything? Is that correct?
Yeah.
So on the first note is that these systems are new. And what I mean by that is, so back in the day, in like the late 90s, early 2000s, you had a bunch of peer-to-peer people who were psyched about peer-to-peer stuff, and they had this dream of like, we're going to make this peer-to-peer world, and as a result of making this peer-to-peer world, we're going to be able to create peer-to-peer structures that can then overcome the existing institutions, and it's going to be awesome. It's going to be this great new peer-to-peer world. But they couldn't even like, they couldn't essentially solve this like coordination/infrastructure problem, because you'd ask yourself, oh man, I want a mailing list so I can encrypt stuff to all these people, and like no one was building the mailing list thing. And you couldn't know there's like all the tools in order to actually get stuff done were actually really bad. And so that's what this dude Vinay Gupta calls a metastructure, where it's like traditional peer-to-peer things were bad at building metastructures. But the new blockchain ecosystem is better at building these metastructures, better at building these infrastructure, because essentially because the money is baked in. And so when you have the money baked in, then you can do things like promise to build a new system, ICO out of that for that promise, and then with that promise, and actually build that new system, and then give the people the utility value of the tokens to work within that system. So to say, the hope. And this guy Vinay Gupta calls Ethereum a Swiss Army chainsaw for building metastructures, which is a crazy claim. So he hopes, and from his point of view, and as we can see with the Ethereum ecosystem, for how much random tooling has existed within it already, that hopefully it's going to be better at building infrastructure that will allow these peer-to-peer systems to actually propagate. So that's the first point. On the second point, if blockchain fails in various ways, how will it fail? So, I mean, there are so many different failure modes for it.
It sounds like yes. How would it not fail?
Exactly. I was just about to thank you. Yeah, exactly. When it fails in big ways, is there a way that it would not fail? Depends on how it fails. I think that the classic, talking with another EA about this recently, for him, and he's relatively bearish on blockchain. For him, the things that he could see still happening are a new kind of global currency. Something like Bitcoin, whether it's a store of value, perhaps a medium of exchange, but some kind of thing that says, look, this is actually a new kind of global currency, and is usable in various for people who want to transact across borders with in lower transaction ways, lower cost ways, and for people who exist in nation states where their traditional currency is bad. So he sees that as, and I kind of agree with him, that could still be a good use case. It's like actually only like one cryptocurrency existing, and then the other one is on the financial side. So so you can imagine that no public blockchains actually exist, but rather there are lots of private blockchains that are working in financial industries and like supply chain industries around things like interoperability and like decreasing costs of decreasing the cost of interoperating with each other. So those would be for me the two things. Things in finance and a global store of value are the things that if and when blockchain fails, those things might not fail.
How would you recommend if an EA wanted to get into this space and wanted to actually, let's say somebody bought some of your arguments and wanted to help with this, what would you recommend?
That's a good question. So there are, I pretty much recommend two things at the beginning. One is there are 3 good newsletters that I would recommend. There's one called Token Economy, which is super good. There's another one called This Week in Ethereum, which is super good. And there's another one called Proof of Work. And all of those newsletters are essentially a way to determine signal from the vast glut of noise that exists in this space. After you start signal to noising there, then what I would do is go to various local meetups and events around you. So if you go to meetup.com and you look for Ethereum or blockchain or whatever, go there, talk with a bunch of the people, understand who they are, what it's like, what kind of jobs exist in the space, and then maybe eventually go to something like an event, and these are like random little events, conferences where you get kind of a full bore of like what it has to offer. So for me it would be learning through the internet, through newsletters, trying to get the signal from the noise, and then also interacting with the community around you and talking with people face to face who are actually in it to learn both how they think and what kinds of things exist. Cool.
Would you suggest that EAs invest in crypto?
That's an interesting question. So for me personally, I've essentially not invested in crypto at all. I'm essentially counter-signaling against the space where a lot of people were into it, being like, oh man, like I'm in it for the money. And I was like, I'm not in it for money. I'm in it for this like macro-systemic thing. Which was arguably a stupid decision. But would I recommend that you buy stuff? I mean, I think that so from a pure, if you're already investing money in things, then there's this really good book called Cryptoassets, which talks from essentially a financial, like imagine like a Wall Street banker perspective, and they talk about from a Wall Street banker perspective, getting into Bitcoin and Ethereum and all these things actually makes a lot of sense because essentially the risks, you want a portfolio that is balanced across various risk types, and that essentially crypto has inverse correlation with other risk types. So as crypto goes down, other things generally go up, and as other things go down, crypto generally goes up. So I think from a pure, just like reasonable investor perspective, I would slightly recommend it. Yeah.
What were those newsletter names again?
Token Economy, and then and I can write that too, and then Proof of Work. I'll just write one of these things. Let's do it right here.
Take it, Proof of Work is a weird son.
Say again?
Sunflower.
I didn't get the joke, but that's okay. Any other questions about this stuff? I'm gonna just, yeah.
I didn't see any like expected value calculations. Can you like come up with any?
Yes.
To convince me this is like mathematically optimal utilitarian.
Yes, totally.
Can you denominate that in Ethereum?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, I probably should have put it first, but I think the most expected value slide that I would claim is essentially. So yeah, I mean, so any of the subclaims have expected value. Like you could claim that the crypto pledge has high expected value, where you say, hey, if we allow crypto pledging to happen and 0.1% of the crypto space then actively donates 5% of their crypto wealth, then how much does that look like, and what is the percentage chance that actually succeeds, and then how much does it get donated to various EA causes. So that could be an expected value thing. The other thing that I'd claim is the other expected value is this homie, which is you can essentially take the expected values from these and say what is the percentage chance that this solving game theory thing works, and then if it does, then it has the expected value of that percentage chance across each of these plus the long-term future.
I guess I'm still confused how it helps do that. I know you mentioned one of the things was like you have some coin that people are. Or you mentioned something about prediction market stuff, but
the real claim here is not that is I would say a sub-claim about emergent properties.
That was the most concrete thing.
Yes, totally.
Also the base.
It's only the base superstructure. That's the thing that you should think about, which is if you believe some random amount of the claims for why it decreases, for why it decreases the cost to coordinate and increases the desire. If you believe any of these claims, or if you believe the claims about the context and the current ecosystem and why it might be a good kind of incubation ground, that's the claim for why it solves game theories. It's a group of people who are in this world of abundance, who understand fragility, who want to co-evolve towards a shared outcome, and as they're in that world, they're also constructing things that decrease the cost of coordination. So that's